So yeah, I guess there are a few things that I wanted to talk about, and I think they're all at least related to this thing we had going on in text on your first video of the series where you had a conversation with DBFL Mike. That was, he was essentially kind of probing you for arguments, I think, for, the theist position. And his question to you was, well, what if the atheist says, demonstrate to me a case where the immaterial acts on the material? And your response to him was, well, we do this all the time in science. I had your exact quote all written out, but it was something along the lines of the science assumes that there are non-material laws acting on the material world. Otherwise, nothing would be predictable. And I was asking you to demonstrate this assumption. I don't think it's a necessary assumption, and I think you need to show how it is a necessary assumption. Because
well, what's your alternative?
It's an open question. Well, I can offer a couple of alternatives. One being the case that you were suggesting, and I don't know if you had a smart comeback to that particular suggestion, and that's why you're suggesting it, but that the material world may direct itself in some way. But even more than that, whatever is, when we look at the laws of matter, really what these are observations about consistencies about the world. When we say, the law of gravity says such and such, we're not talking about an order, a rule that matter is the law doesn't tell matter what to do. It describes what matter does, what we observe matter to do. Now, it does follow a certain order, but there are other ways of explaining that. For instance, there may be some deeper material thing that is constraining matter to these kinds of consistencies. And I'll give you an example, and then I'll let you respond.
Sure.
We can look at different objects in the world, say a river. And a river is a very consistent thing. Once it's dug its channel, and if that channel is dug deep enough that it can't overflow its banks, it pretty much stays in the same place all the time. So if we kind of stepped back to a wider perspective and looked at it from space, we would say that is a very consistent phenomenon. The water always flows in this same place. And yet it's not immaterial laws that are constraining that observation. It's the material banks of the river that are constraining that particular consistency of nature. And we may only see that phenomenon. That phenomenon may last an entire lifetime. If we lived our life in space, we would look down and see the Earth and see this river flowing in the same channel for generations. Perhaps even if it changed from one thing to another, from one channel to another, or if the channel moved, it may not be perceptible. So I guess the bottom line, what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily the case, I don't think, that whatever is constraining matter to these consistencies that we see is immaterial. And further, I'd say that it's not necessarily even the case that they're eternal or unchanging, which I think is another assumption that lies behind that assumption that whatever it is immaterial. So I'll let you.
Sure. Well, you mentioned your example. Your example with the river shows us a moving body in a predictable fashion, right? It curves at certain points and it goes straight at other points and so on. And you suggest that that is maintained because of the properties of the river banks. But I would ask you what it is that dictates the properties of the river banks such that it can dictate the flow of the river.
It's the properties of the matter that is composed. The river banks are composed of the rock.
It can't be that, because then the river could just choose its own course, you see. If really matter was its own governing principle, the river would not need the river banks in order to meander through a countryside. But you recognize that matter needs to be constrained by something, and in that you said it is the river banks that is telling the river what to do. But it can only do that if the river banks have some kind of property.
Can I just
Yes?
pause you for one moment and just back up to
Sure. It's
that
all yours.
statement that the river would choose where it's going if the I wasn't clear on that. You kind of threw me for a loop.
You would like me to clarify?
Yeah, I'd like you
I
to
see.
unpack it a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, like I said, if you believe that matter is its own governing force, that it behaves the way it behaves because of its own essence, because of its own self, because of its own substance, then the river does not need banks in order to meander. The river could just meander all by itself. But it doesn't meander by itself. It's told where to go by the river banks.
By other matter.
Yeah.
By other matter. Not by any immaterial thing, but by other matter is directing the action of the matter of the river. I'm suggesting that
Yes.
could as well be the case for the natural laws that govern particle physics, or the attraction of matter to one material body to another, or one mass to another. That could just as well be the case behind those laws, and then even behind whatever is behind those. And so
Yeah, it could be. It could be. It becomes very difficult to argue that, though, if, in fact, at its root, all material is energy. Unless you can say that there's some different qualities of energy, you have nothing left to account for any diversity in the physical world. So then you would not have rivers or riverbanks or anything else in between. Because there are these different phenomenons, and they are made up merely of energy, I wonder how it is that you account for any amount of diversity in the material world.
I'm not sure what you mean when you say it's all just energy. We know
Well,
that mass.
go ahead. I was just going to say that, like, at the... Go ahead, speak.
We know that mass, the mass of particles, is convertible to energy. We don't really know that everything is just energy. In fact, we know that a good portion of the mass of the universe itself isn't like anything that we can observe. We know it's there indirectly, but it's not like anything like the material that we know, that your hands and the earth and the suns, the galaxies are made up of. It's something different. They've given it a name. It's dark energy. But that doesn't really say anything about it. All they know is that it's there, but not really what it consists of. So
Mm.
to say that, well, everything is just energy, I understand the case that if everything is exactly the same, then there can't, how do you get any kind of variation? But that's not the case. That's not what we find, that everything at its root is exactly the same. So I'm not clear where that
Well,
argument
that's
comes
fine.
from or is going.
That's fine. Then we'll pitch it. I'm interested then in hearing more about dark energy and what people think it is, say it is, hope it is, that sort of thing.